Well, that's us at 7:30. Welcome to John Muir Trust's local group for the North East of Scotland's autumn talk. I'm going to stay in the background, but just to let you know that this presentation will be recorded. So we'd ask that people stay muted and preferably stay with their video off at this stage. The chat will be closed fairly soon. We'll open it again at the end of the talk and we'll take questions that way. There are still a few people coming in, but I'm going to hand over to coordinator of the local group, James, to introduce what's happening tonight.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Donald. And thanks everybody for turning up at this event, which has been organised by the John Muir Trust North East Scotland group with the help of John Muir Trust headquarters. Thank everyone for joining us tonight then. And also thank those in registering through Eventbrite who have kindly donated some funds to John Muir Trust. The format this evening is a few more words from me, not really. I'll hand over to the main presenter of the evening, Andrew Painting from National Trust for Scotland, Marlodge. We'll see his presentation. The chat, as Donald said, will be off during that, but it'll come on towards soon after Andrew's finished. And Andrew will hand over to Ross Brannigan, who's the John Muir Trust headquarters engagement officer. And he has some very new news for us all to hear. So he'll be talking for a few minutes at least, during which time the chat will be reopened. And that's when we can pose the question and answers, which will be followed subsequently. Whilst the chat is still open though, at the moment, if you can just tell us where you're coming from, you know, Aberdeen, London, France, Paris, wherever, it's nice for us and useful for us to know. But let me introduce Andrew. As Donald said, we organise North East Scotland here some conservation work parties up and down Royal Deeside, and those include NTS Marlodge. That was pre-COVID days, and we hope those will resume again next year. But it was then in 2016 when we were there that I first met Andrew. He joined the team at Marlodge. And so over the years, I spent quite a few days out on the hills with him as part of these conservation work parties. And I began to realize a little bit about the work he did, because we were up there, you know, 650, 700 meters planting trees and stuff like that. Andrew originally came from Cornwall, and I thought, well, this is a huge change for him. But he kind of adapted by doing a master's degree at the University of Aberdeen, so that kind of got him into the Scottish way of things. But what I didn't realize when I spent those few days with him is that many of his days during the course of the year were very much like that, but much more varied than whatever I had seen. And very recently, he put that down on pen and paper and wrote and published this book, Rewilding, the Rescue of Wild Land, which is a really nice and easy read, but it gave me a much greater idea and impression of what the ecologists and rangers do at Marlodge, which is quite pioneering work. So I'm really interested to, having worked with him, having read the book, not quite got the t-shirt, but better than t-shirt, we're going to hear Andrew speaking tonight. So I won't say any more than that, except the chat will go off now. The recording will be on, and I'll hand over to Andrew then to start the main event of this evening, his talk. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thanks very much, James. I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. And That should be us away. Now, hopefully that's a nice picture of a very fat, very content looking golden eagle chick that you can see. Thanks very much to James for the introduction. James is doing himself a bit of a disservice there. The John Muir Trust work parties have done an awful lot at Marlodge, which I'll talk a bit more about in later on in the talk. I've called this talk 25 Years of Ecological Restoration at Marlodge Estate. Marlodge Estate is a fascinating place. It's a very large place, and there's all sorts of stories that go along in the background. I said at one point in the book that, you know, you couldn't hope to write the whole story of Marlodge. So I'm going to mostly focus on the ecological stuff, and that's mostly what I focus on in my book. I do have a Facebook page. It's Regeneration, the Rescue of a Wildland. It's okay. I'd suggest you follow the Marlodge Facebook page as well for all the latest up-to-date stories about what the team's up to there, because they post some really good stuff on there. So this is me out in the hills. As James says, I've been an ecologist at Marlodge since 2016. I joke in the book that, you know, the reason I wrote it was because people are constantly asking me what an ecologist does, and I never really know what to say. But basically, an ecologist is someone who studies the rules and relationships which underpin the natural world. In practice, my job is really looking at the habitats and ecosystems at Marlodge, working out what works and what doesn't, and if things aren't working for whatever reason, trying to find ways to sort the situation out. James also very charitably said the book is about my stories. I'd say it's actually about the stories of hundreds of other people going back hundreds of years. There's a very short list of the people we work with at Marlodge. It's a really huge undertaking that involves people from all walks of life. And that's what's really interesting about the story as well. You know, we get to, in my line of work, I get to work with all sorts of people. So yeah, a little bit more about the book. It's really a series of stories of people quietly working to make the world a better place. Marlodge isn't perfect. A lot of things are fantastic and going really well, but nowhere is perfect. That's really what makes the story quite interesting as well. So these are stories of conflicts and sometimes political difficulties, but also reconnection and regeneration and working things out for the common good. And that's the book. I should say you can buy it wherever books are sold. It's doing the rounds at the minute. So over to the real hero of the story, the land itself. Marlodge Estate is the largest national nature reserve in the UK. It was acquired by National Trust of Scotland in 1995 with a specific remit to manage land for primarily environmental conservation purposes, but also to continue Highland sport and to make the land accessible to everyone who wanted to come. Talk a bit more about that in more detail in a bit. It's a place of cutting edge conservation. Right back at the beginning, 1995, the Trust dedicated itself to generally trying to follow natural processes when it came to ecological restoration. And there's all sorts of interesting cutting edge genetic and technological stuff going on behind the scenes at the minute. Very importantly, I'd say probably the thing that excites me most about this land is that it is managed by the Trust specifically for the benefit of the people of Scotland. The whole one of the reasons I like getting up in the morning and doing my job is this is a place for everyone. And to that end, if you've not been to Marlodge before, you know, absolutely do. I'd urge you to come along and have a look at the place. That's us in the middle of the Cairngorms National Park. We make up a fair chunk of it, about 7%. and the Cairngorms National Park is a fairly large place. In the chat, if anyone can work out where myself and myself and Shyla in that picture, if anyone can work out what hill we're walking down, then I don't know, you'll get some sort of bonus point if you can say in the chat where that is. So we're a very cold place. We're a very big place, 30,000 hectares. We've got 15 Munros, 4 of the 5 highest mountains in the UK, over 5,200 species. I think it's about 5,225, I think, at the last count, including lots of Caledonian pinewood and 30% of Britain's red listed bird species breeding on the estate. This is a little sneak preview of what's coming up. We've seen a massive increase in native woodland regeneration, lots more saplings, but we also have other habitats which we'll talk about in a bit. Lots of carbon, locks up in our blanket bogs, high altitude woodland, hen harriers, really nice increases in orchids and rare plants recently. And we also do targeted restoration projects for specific species which need a bit of an extra helping hand. Here is one of those blanket bogs. We've got a fair few different habitats on the estate. These are just some pictures of a few of them. The blanket bogs often they're having a bit of a moment at the minute because of the renewed interest in carbon sequestration, but I always feel a bit sorry for Marlodge's blanket bogs. They don't get talked about that much, so I thought I'd start here with a picture of some nice cotton grassy blanket bog. We also have high altitude lochans. This is Loch Etchican. We have we look after a fairly large chunk of the Cairngorm Plateau. This picture shows quite nicely why it is called the Cairngorm Plateau. It's the highest area of high ground in Britain. And then coming down from the tops, we've got emerging montane scrub. This is juniper beginning to come out of the heather. And of course, the Caledonian pinewoods as well, which is a major part of what we do here. It's not just pines. We've also got birches and all sorts of broadleaves coming through. I put this slide in specifically to remind me of that fact because we often seem to focus on the pines. It's a harsh environment though, as you can see from this picture. This is Ben McDewey. It's a very large area and there's generally a reasonably high biodiversity, but actually it's a really harsh environment. We're looking after places which have very specific needs and cater for very specific species, most of which are fairly rare in a UK context. And these are some of the key species. I don't have time to talk about every single one, but this is a dotterel, one of my favourite birds, one I talk about in the book. Curlews, again, they get featured. Hen harriers. This is a lapwing. This is part of a nest monitoring project we were doing. And then, of course, iconic species like red deer, less iconic species like green shield moss, twin flower ptarmigan, and one of my favourites actually. This is whortle-leaved willow, high up in the hills. That's the Sphinx patch in the background, a very important snow patch in a Scottish context. Sorry for the terrible nature of my my nails there in that picture, but that's a narrow-headed ant. Another species we're doing quite a lot of work with at the minute, and that species is only found in 5 or 6 places in the whole country. It's one of the really rare ones. So this is what we do. We're all about conservation, public access, and highland sport. The whole premise of the estate is to blend those things together for the benefit of everyone. We work to a 200-year vision, which is a real luxury. Means we can do things properly, but also look to the future. Is it rewilding? Sort of, I guess. It depends how you define it. In a strictly scientific sort of definition, some of the stuff we do could be called rewilding. I would rather call it landscape scale environmental conservation. I've started also calling it pre-wilding, because we've been doing it, or the trust has been doing it, since before the term rewilding existed. And it's also more about creating habitats. So, you know, we're not looking at the sort of big charismatic species and reintroduction so much at this point. This is a really important thing, though. We're attempting to reconcile disparate strands of the estate's nature, culture, and social history into one cohesive whole. That's really what we're trying to do. And this is basically some of the things we're doing to on the ground to help that along the way. We are led by natural processes. A lot of that includes things like deer management, removing fences, creating deadwood. But there's a lot of stuff about people in there as well. Certainly enough to keep us all busy. So I like to think of what we do at Marlodge. Rebecca Solnit came up with this idea. She's a political theorist and writer, of the radical centre, a hopeful practice which sees potential allies, a place where people can come together from different walks of life and try and forge a way of getting along with each other and working for the common good. It's I mean, Rebecca Solnit says it's a significant new model. It's not. People have been doing this for thousands of years, but it can be a very difficult thing to do, and it's a really tough one to get your head around sometimes. I also like calling what we're doing the radical sense, because we are right in the middle of the Cairngorms National Park, and certainly when the trust took the place on in 1995, there was an element of radicalness about what the trust was trying to do. The best way to probably get into this story, and the thing that probably has the most dramatic sort of outlook on the ground, is to talk about the Caledonian pine woods. This picture is not from Marlodge. Every other picture from this is. This is from just down the road, a place called Cainlochen. It's an absolute gorgeous mountain off the back of Clasmal. Incredible biodiversity of plants in there, but it's very degraded, and that's entirely through high densities of deer for a long time, and it's become so degraded it's actually been delisted from its triple SI status and that sort of thing. I included Olga Leopold's famous quote in there, and I think this is a really good example of what happened in that situation. So when the trust took the estate on, it did so with the understanding that it would bring its remnant Caledonian pine woods back into some state of health. There's about 840 hectares of semi-natural woodland at Marlodge. Caledonian pine wood is only really found it's only found in Scotland. It's a priority habitat. It's a really important habitat for species like Scottish crossbill, capercaillie, black grouse. The trust had a legal obligation to bring it into favourable condition, and also a moral obligation, of course, as well. When the trust took the place on, most of the trees in the Caledonian pine wood, they were granny pines. They were dying off, essentially, and there were no young trees coming to replace them. The trust walks into a long history at Marlodge of clearances of people, as well as of pines, and also the development of open hill stalking. All of these things combined sort of led to the fact that there had been no new woodland regeneration, no young trees coming up for about 200 years. And this is really the cultural context in which we're talking. This is the monarch of the Glen, of course. It's worth reiterating at this point that the 200-year vision, a self-sustaining intimate mix of structurally and compositionally diverse woodland, ecologically and culturally appropriate, that respects and where possible enhances conservation of the estate's cultural heritage assets. That's a really important and interesting point, and it's one that can be quite difficult to reconcile sometimes. So in '95, the Trust made this plan to save the pinewoods. They'd reduced deer numbers from over 3,000 to around 1,650, something like that. The idea at the time was not to use fencing. Fencing can be a useful management tool, but it also creates problems. It's detrimental to sort of the wildland quality of the area. And really it treats the symptoms rather than the actual cause of the issues that the pinewood was having. You'll notice a little star there, though. We'll come back to fencing in a bit. Importantly, the Trust wanted, or was obliged to, continue to function as a Highland sporting estate. Pioneering stuff at the time. This is really where Marlodge is very interesting, I think, in a Scottish context. If the Trust could manage to stay working as a Highland sporting estate while also increasing the overall ecological health of the woodlands, that would be a really useful paradigm going forwards for land management in Scotland. That being said, there's no such thing as a perfect management intervention. There's no such thing as a perfect estate. And, well, conservation is a very tricky thing, otherwise we wouldn't be having to do it in the first place. This is the Stag Ballroom. This is one of the buildings at Marlodge. And again, this is a really good example of the cultural context we're talking about. The red deer really is the defining species of Royal Deeside. It's a species around which centuries of lives have been lived. It's a beautiful animal, a really charismatic creature, and one that brings a lot of jobs and a lot of culture to an area which is actually not massively populated. So the Trust balancing act was always going to be difficult. There was a commitment to continue field sports on the estate, but there was also a legal obligation to bring the site back into favourable condition. There's all sorts of cultural, social and economic impacts to any management intervention. And there's also different perceptions of the same landscape going on at the same time. I'm always amazed when I'm out on the hill. Two people can look at the same landscape and come to completely different conclusions about it. There's also the other side of it. There's the ethical and moral considerations of killing native species for whatever reason, whether it's for sport or for conservation, for meat. And there's wider environmental benefits and costs to any action. So these are all the things that were sort of going around at the time that Marlodge went on this different tack and decided to reduce its deer numbers in a reasonably large way. Well, did it go well? Well, it took a very long time to get things working the way we wanted to, and it caused a lot of angst from a lot of different people. There were some difficult times, and they lasted quite a long time. You can see the Trust was criticised for killing too many deer. The Trust was criticised for not killing enough deer. And all this led up to 2011, when the Trust took out an independent review to work out what was going right and what was going wrong. And what we've come up with since then is really a hybrid model. We still have low deer numbers in wooded areas. deer numbers remain lower than average actually across the rest of the estate compared to the rest of the country, but still, 7 or 8 per square kilometre. We've also installed a couple fences. These are strategic offset electric fences, sort of to just jivvy along this balancing act as best as possible. But it's a really tricky thing to do, and the trust took a lot of flack over the years. But that's what's interesting, and that's what we can learn from now. And did it work? Well, this is 2011, this picture. In 2011, the ecologists and team at the time had the foresight to take something like 1,000 fixed point photos. And part of my job, I spent about a month this year retaking all the photos. So this was what the situation looked like in 2011. You can see there's a few trees coming through there, but there's a lot of stumps from previous felling. There's no real woodland regeneration. The trees are dying out. The woodland's basically still dying at this point. Fast forward to 2021, and things are looking a bit different. I should say at this point, this is all natural regeneration. We don't really plant trees that often at Marlodge, if we can get away with it. This is all about letting nature do its own thing, and it can be really quite spectacular. And on the ground, we've been really excited to see how fast things can change and how dramatically they can. It's not just pines. There's also a huge amount of birch, rowan, willows, juniper coming through, truly on a landscape scale as well. This is down in the Coik. Again, this is several kilometers from the previous photo. We're talking about woodland regeneration on a truly landscape scale here, which has all sorts of benefits for biodiversity, carbon sequestration, even things like water retention, reducing flooding downstream, increasing water quality. You can also see that we've removed a few fences, like the one in this picture. I think that was actually thanks to the Muir Trust volunteers. I think they might have been involved in taking that fence out. You can see in this picture as well, it's not just the trees that are changing. If you take a look at the river, you can also see that the river is re-wiggling itself. This is a really exciting development, one that has all sorts of implications for biodiversity. It's creating new habitat niches for specialist plants, invertebrates, and birds. This is full of water voles, I should say, this whole area. One of the reasons we didn't want to go down the route of planting extensively is we still had a seed source of Caledonian pines. They were suitable for the area. And when you let nature do its own thing, it puts the right tree in the right place. So you can see how that works on a landscape scale in this picture. And now we've really just got an excuse to look at some more pretty pictures. This is Glen Coik in 2020, I think. Woodland regeneration is really getting away. All of this has turned up since 2011 or so, 2008 really. But in the last 5 years, it's really wonderful to see the growth, and it's just getting faster and faster at the minute. Again, that's Loch Nagar in the background. That's my partner in there for scale. This is a really interesting picture. This is one of Shila's pictures. A couple of those have been Shila's pictures, so thanks to Shila Rao for those. This picture shows natural processes at work. Again, this is quite high altitude. It's about 550 to 600 meters altitude, and you can see the pines are really establishing only where they want to. This is going to create a really interesting and really useful woodland habitat going into the future. It's going to create a woodland that works with nature, which sequesters carbon in the right places, and which is all the more biodiverse for that. It's not just in the woods we work, though. Some of our woodland restoration work has had knock-on effects out with the woodland area. But we are also, like I say, you know, the peat bogs have always get short shrift. We're seeing a big increase in the amount of montane scrub at Marlodge. This is a really exciting development because this habitat was almost completely lost from Scotland. It's now coming back at both Marlodge and quite a few other places across the country now, where people have been doing different similar sorts of restoration projects. This bush itself is about 800 meters altitude, so it can get really high. We're also doing peatland restoration work. That's speeding up now a bit because of the increased interest in carbon sequestration. We do work with specific species as well, where just sitting back and letting nature take its course isn't quite enough. This is entirely because of for anthropogenic reasons. So we work with things like twinflower and alpine sow thistle. I say we do. A lot of this work is done by other people like the Royal Botanic Gardens, the real experts. We've been doing riparian woodland restoration, rewilding or rewiggling the streams, and then we do a lot of partnership work as well. So we're involved in the East Cairngorms Moorland Partnership, who do really good work with waders and then footpath maintenance, that sort of thing. Like I say, I don't really have time to talk about the archaeology, but there are really interesting stories from the people who used to live at Marlodge, people who were cleared previously. There's a lot of cultural heritage on the ground, and reconciling, you know, that sort of past long history, going back right to the Mesolithic period, is a really important part of what we do. So looking at the vision again, it's Marlodge is a place which connects habitats, wildlife and people, past, present and future, integrating conservation, learning, recreation, field sports and culture into one vast and diverse landscape. It's certainly not all us. We've been really lucky to work with the John Muir Trust North East Scotland group for the last much longer than I've been there. Here they are doing some experimental stuff right out in the middle of nowhere. I think this is about 600 meters altitude they're working away at. It was the first day of snow, I think, that one, memory serves, of the year. Earlier on, I showed a list of all the things that we get up to. I've put in blue all the things that the John Muir Trust have helped us with over the years. I've probably missed a few, so do let me know if I have. But they've been really good, actually. It's always a real highlight of my year when the John Muir Trust volunteers come out. So we're not finished yet. We've got a 200-year vision. This picture, by the way, is a greater butterfly orchid. This was the first record. This particular orchid, first one ever recorded west of Braemar, I think, in the Cairngorms anyway. And that was recorded a couple years ago in an area of regenerating sort of scrubby stuff. So we're seeing all sorts of new plants coming back, all sorts of interesting things are happening. So for me, that plant is, I mean, they're not hugely rare in a national context, but for me, it's a real sign of hope for the future. It was very difficult to get this far, and success has been contingent on the inputs of all sorts of people, including the local community, Highland sporting interests, and environmentalists, rangers, ecologists, all the folk who come out and just walk the land and enjoy it. this is really what I wanted to. The reason I wanted to write the book was because we're naturally bad at talking to people who think differently to ourselves, but it's vital to do so. Sorry. So where for the future? Well, this is Hutchison's Bothy. If anyone knows it, sits at 700 meters altitude. And as you can see, there are pines regenerating around it. So this is an area that's going to become high altitude woodland in the next sort of 30, 40, 50 years. A really exciting development. It's not all good news in the future, of course. COP26 is on pretty much as we speak, and we're already seeing the effects of climate change on the estate. We can expect to see more of that. We can expect to see biodiversity loss as a direct consequence of climate change, unfortunately, at this point. We're already seeing a loss of snow cover, which is really important for quite specific species to the Cairngorms. I think as I'm speaking, I think the Sphinx patch might have just melted for only I think the 8th time in history, something like that. We're also going to see greater wildfire risk in the future, more visitors, which is great. You know, we want to see as many people as possible, but with people also comes, you know, danger of disturbance, that sort of thing. And there are potential losers, particularly from climate change. Things like dotterel are really going to struggle to stay in Scotland, and there's not much we can do about that on the ground, except reduce our emissions as fast as quickly as possible. That being said, there are also things to get excited about, particularly at Marlodge. We're already seeing greater carbon sequestration. We're already providing more flood prevention and water service things, more climate change mitigation. We're already seeing greater connectivity between habitats across the Cairngorms, and also seeing highland sporting opportunities. You know, this is a really interesting time for highland sport. I think going into the future, we're really at a sort of a pinch point in its history, and I think now is a time when we can really see it evolving into the future. Well, this is a little bit speculative, but these are things that I imagine we might see at Marlodge in the future. We certainly don't have any plans to reintroduce any of these things ourselves. And you can see one of them, one controversial one there, has a question mark next to it. But these are certainly things that are not beyond the realms of possibility of seeing back with us at some point in the future. So I think that's me. I think it's back over to the team, and thanks very much, and send all your questions in and all that sort of stuff. I might have been a bit short there. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Andrew, indeed, for that talk. I have learned a lot more. One of the things I learned quite quickly in the first few slides, that having not been able to take a team of conservation volunteers to Marlodge in the last 2 years because of the pandemic, I quickly realized that I'm homesick for it and can't wait to get back with some like-minded people to contribute to all we've heard about today. So it's fantastic progress that NTS at Marlodge have made over the years, and with a 200-year kind of project outlook, I would be really interested to know what happens to that. So we've got an inkling from Andrew tonight, and certainly appreciate that. He mentioned briefly the Marlodge website, Facebook page, which keeps me up to date with the week-to-week things that I'm missing, and it's a very educational website, Facebook page, from which you can learn a great deal. So thanks very much indeed for recommending that. And of course, thank you, Andrew, for, if you want, promoting the John Muir Trust volunteers who on almost all occasions thoroughly enjoy themselves. I can remember one extremely wet and midgy day where it was very, very hard to enjoy yourself. But we did make a difference, and that was the main point. We came away having made a difference to the estate, and in that case it was taking down some fences. So Donald will have opened the chat window, and hopefully some questions have come rolling in. So I'm going to hand over to sorry, no, I need to be handing over to Ross Brannigan. Sorry, Ross, I'm not forgetting you. Ross Brannigan, our engagement officer at John Muir Trust headquarters. So the chat window is still open for questions and answers, which will be answered. But in the meantime, let me hand over to Ross Brannigan, who's going to give you the up-to-date news, not at Marlodge, but from John Muir Trust. So Ross, it's over to you. I'm sorry for nearly missing you out.
That's all right. I like the breaking news style of bringing me in there. I like to hear a little like as I enter the frame. Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thanks again to Andrew for his piece. I'm going to give a little bit of an update as to what's going on with the John Muir Trust at the moment, and you'll maybe spot that it has something of a Ben Nevis theme to it this evening. So yeah, so this year the Trust is celebrating 21 years looking after the UK's biggest mountain, which is Ben Nevis, of course, which you can see that big humpback whale to the center left of that photograph. And that campaign has been running, as I say, from the start of the year, really. And we've been looking to raise £100,000 to continue our conservation and engagement work on the Ben and in the Glen. And I'm delighted to say that if it actually moves, there we are. We have raised £104,305. All of that will be going straight back into our work to look after the Ben and the Glen for everybody to enjoy, but also for us to do some of the work which I will now talk about. So one of the really nice stories from this year has been our Junior Rangers programme. These hardy bunch are standing grinning at sort of like the entrance to Glen Nevis, and they are just a few of 10 local school children in Lochaber who have been taking part in the Junior Ranger programme. We also have 8 more kids up in Ullapool who are helping us at Kunyag, which is really great. So what they've been doing is helping us out with doing just a little bit of field work. They've been building some skills that are really useful for a career in conservation. They've learned navigation. They've been helping us out at events. Archie, who's on the furthest right, he was helping me out at Skyline Scotland just a month ago. So they've been really getting their teeth stuck into it and really grasping it with both hands. And it's been really, really lovely to see them develop throughout the program. You'll also be able to see a little video of them like talking about what they've been up to and why they got involved with the program over on our Facebook page. So just search up the John Muir Trust on our Facebook page. So that's a really, really lovely story. One of the other things that's going to be kind of coming up and a little bit more of a focus for us over the next year or so is more conversations around our mountain woodlands. As Andrew alluded to, our mountain woodland habitat is probably one of the rarest habitats in the UK. It's been basically carved back by hundreds of years of either burning or grazing by sheep and by deer. And what we're really trying to do is allow that to regenerate. And if you kind of see it as it's the tree line that will form just above like about 600 meters or so, short stumpy trees that are quite specialized to mountain habitats. So we've got some new language on our website about that, but we also, in a sort of like theme of world exclusives, if you like, this evening, we also have a new film coming out, which if I have a moment of your time, I will show you the trailer for.
I think this is real mountains here. Glen Nevis, for instance, is probably the most beautiful glen in Scotland. We were just looking around for crags, you know, and you noticed that roof way up at Muir Trust, so we pegged across the roof. I didn't feel that that was likely to be done free. It just didn't seem likely.
I think it is actually the last route in Glen Nevis which hasn't been free climbed. I started off here in Glen Nevis just thinking about rock and new routes, but the more you connect yourself to a place, the more you notice. And now my attention's expanded to why these mountains look the way they do, how they're managed.
So that film made by Dave McLeod is going to be shown at the Kendall Mountain Festival on, I think that is the 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st of November, and will be released to the public on Dave McLeod's YouTube channel on the 22nd of November. So watch this space, keep an eye out for it. It's a really great film. Not only will you get to see Dave doing some mad stuff on the Muir Trust roof at the end of Glen Nevis, but you'll also get to learn a little bit about Scottish land management and about the Montian woodlands that a lot of climbers will probably see more of when they're up in the high crags that are really inaccessible to large herbivores. And then something else which is pretty exciting going into next year is we are currently in the development stages of a new strategy for wild places. That strategy has basically seen us through the last 3 years. Some of you, it's probably something that you haven't really come across, but it does guide all of the work that we do at the John Muir Trust. And we really want to hear your thoughts on what you think of our proposal. So if you head onto our website, you can obviously follow this rather long and unattractive looking link, or you can head onto the homepage and it should be just scroll down a little bit and you'll find it, and you'll get the chance to read over the current proposal and also space for you to feedback on anything you feel is necessary to change. If you're a member of the John Muir Trust, you will be getting this sent out to you as well in the near future, so don't worry too much about getting it in just now, but we're obviously really looking for our members to get involved with this new chapter of our strategy. And then, as is always the delightful case at our North East Scotland members gatherings, this is kind of the time for you to get your Christmas shopping done. So we're really excited to be opening up our Christmas shop. You can get all your usual stuff, all your calendars, diaries, and Christmas cards, but there's also some other goodies in there, and a nice gift pack, which includes some cocoa nibbles, which I can attest are absolutely delightful. They come in your gift bundle. So yeah, if you're wondering how to support us after this event, you can become a member. It's only £2.60 a month. If you use the discount code on the screen, just use TALK, you get 25% off. I mean, £2.60, that's cheaper than a really decent cup of coffee. And you can also go online and donate to us at johnmuirtrust.org/donate. And as I say, you can buy some merchandise at johnmuirtrust.org/shop and make yourself look just as happy as Isaac does here, planting a downy willow into the crags of Helvellyn. You will get an email after this event saying thank you for coming, asking for your feedback, and also sharing some of these links for you to look at as well. So after my little spiel, I will now pass back to our host, James, and I think we're going to start looking for some questions. So I think Donald, actually, you're going to be.
I'll come in there because questions have been coming in while you've been talking. I'm sure that people have been listening to you. Sadly, as a virtual event, we can't have the merchandise available for people to buy directly at the end, but you can certainly order online, and there's plenty there to get your Christmas cards and other things. Okay, so questions have been coming in. Keep them coming. We've got 15, 20 minutes maybe for questions. So I'm afraid it's going to be me talking to Andrew, but I will try and get through as many of the questions as we can. I'm going to take them in order. So if you were rewilding Marlodge again, you might be looking at what physical conservation activities or actions you might be able to cut out. Have you any plans to do less of some things in the future?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and also different though as well. I mean, so one of the really important things about if we're calling it a rewilded landscape is that it continues to benefit humans and local communities as well. So there's always going to be a case for managing deer populations in Scotland, simply because we don't have any natural predators, and also it's a cultural gesture as well. One that's deeply loved by a lot of people. That being said, I mean, a lot of the work that James and the Donald and the John Muir Trust team have been doing is things like reducing the amount of deer fencing, bringing it all out and doing it down. But yes, the general principle is to do as little as possible. There's good ecological reasons for doing that, as well as perhaps ethical reasons. Is that any good? Does that answer your question?
I hope so. They're not my questions. I'm reading them. I can see two from Eric, and I can answer one to him because we asked the question when we were talking to Andrew earlier. The blue line on the regeneration maps was the limit of the surveys, I believe, and pretty much an altitude line. Is that correct?
Yes, it was. Yes, that was. Well, that's where we asked the surveyors to work to, but they got a bit overexcited once or twice in the most recent one. We kept finding regeneration further out than we were expecting them to.
Okay, and Eric's other question is, using fences, does this really integrate sport and conservation or simply split the estate into two?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think the first thing I'd say is, we're working to a 200-year management vision. That's necessarily going to be dynamic, and it's going to change what it looks like on the ground over time. I think for me, the two will really properly be reintegrated when we see sport back in the regeneration zone, back in amongst the trees, and we begin to see a sporting tradition within the woodlands. We're not there yet. This is a really long journey, but that's certainly something to think about for the future. Fences do sort of split things up a little bit, perhaps in the mind's eye. I think more important is perhaps the way we think about the landscape holistically, and also we need to think about our neighbours as well. Other places might have different management objectives to us, and then we have to respect that. And putting a couple fences in is really as much about being a good neighbour as it is the specific management objectives of the estate, I guess.
That rather leads on to a later question. Are red deer more hefted to an area of ground than one might have thought? How are neighbours in the Coich affected by your plans and your practice?
Yeah, so deer can get hefted, absolutely. Again, it's important to say, there's no perfect solution to what are really wicked problems. I don't really think we certainly, there are areas of the regeneration zone where we have deer and areas where we don't. That can have impacts over quite a large area of our estate. But I don't think there are really any issues along the Coig border.
Okay, changing the theme a little bit, has natural flood management been clearly demonstrated at Marlodge, or is it still a good hypothesis?
So yeah, I should probably expand a bit on what our sort of flood retention and management stuff involves. Back in 2015, a lot of flood defences were taken out. And this happened just before Storm Frank, actually, which, as you'll know if you live in Deeside, was a pretty catastrophic flood event. What we've essentially created is a natural floodplain in the Coig Flats, and it's one that's now guided by the natural ebb and flow of the Dee and the Coig. There is, I think, a paper coming out fairly soon. I'm not sure whether it's been peer reviewed yet. But yes, basically, I can certainly say from a biodiversity point of view, we are really seeing a lot of interesting stuff coming up on these re-wiggled floodplain areas.
Okay. Can the policies of Marlodge the balance between sport and regeneration be easily applied to a smaller estate? Or is it a benefit of the scale?
There certainly is a benefit of scale. There's always a benefit of scale with these things. And a lot of that comes with collaborative management as well. So yes, you absolutely could apply the principles from Marlodge to a smaller area, but you would be more dependent on what your neighbours are doing. So again, it's really a case of when we're talking about landscape scale conservation, and that's what we really need now when we're facing this environmental and climate emergency. We need to stop thinking just within sort of estate borders and within individual property borders, and actually think more holistically about what we're doing across entire landscapes. So one of the really interesting things that we do a lot of work with not only the East Cairngorms Moorland Partnership, but also the Cairngorms Connect area. So we're getting the benefits of working with them, and they're seeing hopefully some benefits of working with us when it comes to proper landscape scale conservation of species that actually really need very large landscapes to thrive in.
I think in that you're partially answering a later question of how would you compare your philosophy and successes with those at Glenfeshie?
There are certainly quite obvious similarities. I think what's really exciting about Marlodge for me is that it does take this. I'm not saying Glenfeshie don't do this, but it takes this middle ground. What I really would like to think Marlodge does is work as an exemplar for Highland sporting practice across Scotland, as well as being an exemplar for environmental conservation. That being said, there are similar, quite obvious similarities between what we're up to and what Glenfeshie are up to, and we do work very closely with Glenfeshie as well on quite a few different things.
Yeah. A question that most people won't have seen because it's come directly to me is for tree growth. Do you have a percentage that is from natural regen rather than from active planting? I think you indicated there was very little, if any, active planting.
Be like 99% natural regen, something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. About well, certainly 95% plus.
Is there a reason for the estate remaining a hunting estate?
Yeah, so I suppose there are two reasons. One is one goes back to the acquisition of the estate. So when the National Trust of Scotland took on the estate, it couldn't afford to buy the place. but the trust was seen by a lot of different sort of people from different organisations as a safe pair of hands for it. And those stakeholders came from different walks of life. So the trust wouldn't have been able to purchase and manage the estate without the help of the Heritage Lottery Fund and without the help of Scottish Natural Heritage, but also without the help of the Easter Charitable Trust, who put in a generous donation to help the National Trust of Scotland actually buy the place. There were stipulations with that gift, though. The main one being that the estate continued to be run as a Highland sporting estate. I think the line is for as long as Highland sport remains legal, or something to that effect. So from a sort of more ethical and perhaps cultural point of view, Highland sport isn't for everyone, to be honest with you. I'm not really a sporting man myself, but I think we need to be aware that, you know, there are different ways to understand landscapes, and people come from different walks of life. So for me, it's a different way of understanding Scotland's landscape than perhaps what a lot of people understand it, or the area from which a lot of people come from. But there's value in that, and there's value in people coming together from different walks of life, I suppose.
Okay, thank you for that. What have you found to be the biggest challenge to reducing deer numbers sufficiently?
Oof, gosh, it did take a long time to work out the sort of on the ground difficulties of the things. I think, to be honest with you, that just comes with time. I don't think there's any specific thing that makes it difficult or doesn't make it difficult. That being said, the ground you're working on is always going to change and always going to be different. So there'll be really site-specific issues with that. Oh gosh, what was I going to say? I can't remember. Sorry.
Well,
no, sorry, that was it. One thing. I think one thing going into the future that will be a new challenge. One of these good problems to have is that actually the regen now is getting so thick in certain areas, it's actually quite hard to stalk through. So, you know, that's an interesting new problem for the future, I suppose. But one that's quite exciting, and that, you know, we've not really seen that much before in Scotland.
Okay. Yes, linked to that, given that it's taken 25, 26 years to reach the state you are now, you've learnt a lot in that time. How quickly could you get to the same state of regeneration if you were to start afresh today?
Do it a little bit faster, but well, if we were to start today rather than 25 years ago, that would have been 25 years off than they were. So that's one issue. And I guess there's that old proverb about the best time to plant a tree or naturally regenerate a tree was 50 years ago. The second best time is today. Yeah, I think, you know, you could probably move that down from 20 years to 10 years, I guess. But again, it's very site specific with these things. The Cairngorms are, you know, particularly remote and difficult to work in, and cold and acidic. You know, if you were working down in the lowlands, you could you know, restore a piece of woodland fairly quickly by comparison, depending on the species you work with.
And Petra notes that regeneration seems to have taken off quite recently. Would you say some more about the likely forward projection of what's happening? And her question was the delay mostly due to deer numbers still being high initially?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that was the main thing to begin with. Looking forward, I think the best thing you can do is look at that 200-year management vision. It's going to take a while for, you know, all of these things to come together. And what's really interesting about the woodlands at the minute is they're in this sort of liminal stage where you've got all the old trees and you've got the young trees, but you don't have anything in the middle. That's not, but it's better than it was, but it's not perfect from a sort of biodiversity and woodland point of view. So, you know, we're going to see the benefits of what we've done now sort of play out over the next 200 years. I imagine we'll see more woodland expansion, but I wouldn't expect wall-to-wall trees at Marlodge anytime soon. And actually, we wouldn't want that either. That's not what we're going for. You know, what we're actually after is a mixture of woodland areas, scrubby areas, and then also moorland, blanket bogs, and the high altitude sort of plateau as well. It's really that mix you're after from biodiversity and carbon and climate perspectives.
Yeah. Okay. You touched on reintroductions. There's one question specifically on what do you think the impact of wolves would have on the landscape? And I would comment that one species that you've not talked about reintroducing is man. There's quite a cultural heritage of people living in the glens. Any comment on that?
Yeah, well, we'll start with the easy one, wolves. There are studies that have been done that suggest that, you know, if you bring wolves in, it changes the behavior of deer, it reduces deer numbers, and you see more woodland regeneration. You look to places like Yellowstone, the famous one. I would caveat that. I would say we don't actually know what would happen in Scotland. I think from a functional point of view, they could be a really useful ally for the fight against environmental decline and climate change, but they're not a silver bullet, and species are never silver bullets. You know, they're animals at the end of the day. They're not functional tools. So I think, you know, we should, if we're thinking about reintroducing species, it should be for the merits of the species and the animals themselves, rather than for any function that we might want them to do or not do. And then for people, yeah, that's a really interesting question. So Marlodge has been populated since, well, we had archaeologists out doing a really interesting project earlier in the year. They found flints from the Mesolithic period, 6,000–7,000 years old. And humans have been on the ground here for as long as the Scots pines have, for as long as the red deer have. It's a really important part of the cultural heritage and also the natural heritage of the area. That being said, the areas were cleared quite a long time ago, you know, Glen Louis and Glen Dee. What I would question is whether there's any merit in repopulating those places when they're already bringing really important human and cultural benefits to the area, as they currently are.
Okay, thank you for taking that. Can you tell us how the book came about? Why did you end up writing it?
It sort of came about in 2018. We were doing all these transects and I was taking down all this data, and I just one day I looked up and I noticed the birches were suddenly about 1 meter higher than I remembered them being. And I sort of thought to myself, oh, well, actually, maybe I should tell people about this, and maybe this is a story that actually could be quite interesting to people, and also one that deserves to be told. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that actually the ecology of it's, you know, quite interesting to most people. It's very interesting to me. But what's perhaps even more interesting is the stories of the people who are doing the work. And then as I delve deeper, of course, there's all the social and political aspects of the work. And it's the stuff we were doing at Marlodge seemed to fit into a wider narrative that's playing out across the Highlands in particular at the minute. So it really came about from that, and I toyed with it for a few months and spoke to a few people. and realized that a lot of people were doing a lot of work, and they weren't getting the recognition they deserved. So it really came about from that. The other reason I got my first degree was English literature, and I thought I should finally use it for some reason, because I've not used it for anything since I graduated about 12 years ago.
Oh, well, you've certainly managed to bring those two aspects together. What I've read of it it's great, and I would encourage anyone who hasn't read it to buy a copy and read it. Okay, there's been a little bit of media interest in what's happening at Balmoral. Has NTS or Marlodge specifically shown Prince Charles, the Queen, William, what's been achieved with a view to the same transformation taking place at Balmoral?
Keep thinking I should put a copy of the book in the post to him. I haven't got around to it yet. So we work quite closely with Balmoral on a lot of things, particularly with I'm not doing any of it, but there's a twin flower conservation project going on at the minute that's really doing quite well, actually. So we do talk to Balmoral quite frequently, and you know, they're just down the road. And of course, Prince Charles is the patron of the National Trust of Scotland. That has reminded me, though, that I was intending to send an invite out to him. So that's well done for reminding me. That was on my to-do list.
Okay, are we still good for a few more questions? It's very much firing questions at you. If you're happy to carry on, I've got a few more.
I shortchanged you on the presentation. It was about 10 minutes short, so you're far away.
I don't think anyone feels shortchanged tonight. What about the number of reindeer up on the plateau? Do they cause any problems?
We do keep an eye on them, but they're really more confined to the other side of the Cairngorms than us. We certainly haven't, you know, we've done like, you know, monitoring impacts on various things, and we haven't seen any particular impacts from them. But we do keep an eye on them in the same way that we keep eyes on all of our sort of herbivore numbers. But the short answer is no, but good question.
Okay, next question's on red grouse as an iconic Scottish species. What steps are being taken to consolidate and expand their numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. So red grouse are an iconic species, and they're one that do okay at Marlodge. We've got a lot of habitat that's quite suitable for them, and is going to remain so for a very long time. So we do walked up grouse shooting. We don't do driven grouse shooting. So we do very little of the sort of traditional driven grouse shooting management practices. The main one we do, and this is backed up by scientific evidence that it can be useful, is predator control. It's not done lightly, and it's, to me, it's not great we have to do it, but at the end of the day, it's along the same rationale as managing deer numbers. So we keep a close eye on the red deer, on the red grouse bag, and they fluctuate in numbers. They do their cycle. Nowhere's had a good year this year, but to be honest with you, they kind of look after themselves. If you're not wanting to achieve a massive shooting surplus, there's not much you have to do to keep red grouse. They're hardy creatures. They like heather. We've got a lot of heather at Marlodge. So we're not really worried about them. Beyond the spot of predator control, they really do look after themselves.
Perhaps in contrast to Capercaillie. Any comments on management that might encourage Kappa?
Kappa, yeah, they're not doing well in D-side. I do write about Capercaillie in the book. We've done all we can at the estate. We're increasing the amount of woodland. The good folks at Muir Trust have removed fences that were not doing well for them. I should say the fences we do have in place now are offset electric, which is specifically designed to stop collisions between species like Capercaillie black grouse, which can fare very badly from collisions with fences. Unfortunately, yeah, they are doing very badly in Deeside at the minute. We've basically done everything we can bar a reintroduction. They're still clinging on just about, but yes, unfortunately, there's not much more we can do now.
Okay, I think I've got two more on Highland sporting estates and deer. Can you say how many stalkers and additional staff are actually employed?
Yeah, sure. So this is quite an interesting. I keep saying interesting. This is quite a difficult debate to get into. And one thing I would say about environmental restoration is and employment in rural communities is it's not a silver bullet. We basically employ roughly the same amount of people as were employed when the place was a Highland sporting estate in its entirety. There's been some diversification of employment, but we do still have a complement of I think four or five stalkers at the minute, plus gillies in the season. And they're going to stay here forever, essentially. You know, we're always going to need stalkers, be it on the open hill or in the woodlands. They're really important. They're basically the reason that, you know, on the ground that the woodlands have gotten away. And it's worth remembering that. One thing I would say, which is really important about rural communities, is when an area only has one sort of means of economic output, that makes that area incredibly vulnerable to changes, be it social or environmental. So basically, unfortunately, you know, a lot of the history of the Highlands and rural Britain in general is one of boom and bust economies and cultures. What's really nice about the Marlodge model is that it doesn't rely too heavily on any one individual management practice. Oh, sorry, the cat's getting in the way. I better show her off. My partner likes it when I show her off. There we go. So, yeah, so if you're thinking in pure economic terms, and if you're thinking about long-term sustainability of rural communities, then actually what you want is a multiplicity of different land management practices. And Marlodge and I guess you could call it rewilding sits quite nicely within that, particularly when you include it alongside other practices as well, like farming, for example.
I think the questioner, I didn't read the full question to you. The questioner was actually asking to compare the economics of a Highland sporting estate with the economics of tourism and hill walking, which is a notoriously difficult one.
It is a difficult one, and I would say it's not a zero-sum game. You can do all of them simultaneously, and that will bring the most economic benefit, rather than saying that land has to be designated to do one thing. Certainly in Britain, tourism is a really big driver of the economy, particularly skiing in the winter. A lot of our income comes not just from Highland sport, but also other practices like weddings, so the ranger services, you know, all that side of things. So the more diverse you can be as a sort of rural land holding, the better, I would say. Just one interesting stat though, it's walkers. Well, so the Upland Hill Track network brings in something like 100 million quid to the Scottish rural economy every year. Driven grouse shooting brings in, the last statistic I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, whoever's watching, brought in about 25-30 million quid, and deer stalking a little bit more, maybe £50 million. So I think the thing to think is, well, you don't want just one of those. You want a mixture.
Yeah. Okay. The other one on deer was, can you leave deer carcasses on the hill?
Yeah, we tend to bring them off the hill for human consumption, partly because partly because it brings a bit of money in, but also there is this almost like a cultural gesture of doing that, respecting the deer. That being said, carcasses are a really important part of ecological processes. So we do leave the growlers out on the hill, and we do leave the occasional deer on the hill, as do most sporting estates, to be honest with you. We're only bringing the stuff in that's suitable for human consumption, and for whatever reason, not all deer will be.
Okay, I think the last few questions are going to be about visitors and their practices. Several comments about e-bikes and the impact that they have on the area.
Yeah, we're seeing it more and more. I'm in two minds about e-bikes. I'm in three minds about e-bikes. Personally, I love them. They're brilliant for my work. I try to use an e-bike rather than a Land Rover as much as possible, just for carbon emissions and wear, all that side of things. E-bikes are also really good for people who can't necessarily get out into the hills in the same way as other people can. So they're a great equalizer for access to the outdoors. That being said, they can cause damage to fragile ecosystems, particularly the Cairngorm Plateau, and they do cause quite a bit of wear and tear on our footpaths. To be honest with you, the main difference between them and mountain bikes is you can go further on an e-bike, and some people are publicizing that sort of benefit. But it's such a new thing. It's really only been the last couple of years that we've seen lots of e-bikes out on the hills. We haven't quite gotten our heads around what we think about the whole thing yet, from a trust point of view anyway. So it's like all new tech, isn't it? It takes us a bit of a while to catch up with it. I think they're neither good nor bad. They can be used both well and badly, I guess.
Okay, and probably the last question, are you prepared for wildfire?
Yeah, so the rangers do a huge amount of work on this. Wildfire risk is only going to get worse in Scotland as well with climate change. Most of our wildfire work is preventative. What we've found is that the best way to stop fires is to stop people lighting fires in the first place. So a big part of what the rangers do is put out people's fires when they light campfires in ridiculously silly places. We have had a few bad wildfires at Marlodge, kind of as you'd expect. We've studied them quite closely as well. So, and Shyla, my boss, has published. Oh no, it's Tom actually. We've published on it anyway. So yes, it's something we do proactively try and prevent. It's also something that is in the top of our minds at the minute and will remain in the top of our minds into the future. So I guess I guess what I'd say is what we do to prevent wildfires is constantly under review as well.
Before we close, we were going to ask Andy to tell us a little bit more about his book before we finally close. So I don't know if you're lined up for that, Andy, or whether Ross wants to say something. I think
yeah, I can say something. Yeah, thanks. It's finally prepared. It looks like this. Oh, you can't see it because of the thing. Anyway, it's good. You should buy it. It's great. Sorry, I thought you probably wanted something a bit more eloquent than that, James. But
I've added the link to the Berlin website in the chats for anyone who is wanting to hop on there and and give it a look. Apparently NTS have ran out of stock, of which a portion would go as a donation to the trust. But it's so popular that it's flying off the shelves like hotcakes. So get them while they're hot.
But you mentioned a website there, Ross. Can you just clarify that? It sounded like Berlin, but I'm not.
It's in the chat. I've popped it in the chat.
Okay, right. Okay, then. Well, I suppose it's up to me to wind up the evening. But again, thanks, Andy, for the talk, and then for all those questions. So now we have a good understanding of the challenges and the balancing act on the environmental side and on the political side as well that you have to deal with, and you're planning to deal with for the next 200 years. So that is fantastic, and I'd like to thank you very much indeed for taking the time of putting the talk together and talking on behalf of John Muir Trust and the Northeast Group here. So with that, I'll thank everyone for coming and joining us. We had some great numbers, and we've still got great numbers that listen through. We in the Northeast Group will have another speaker lined up in the spring. We aim to have 2 a year. Can't say who it is just yet because I can't reveal that, but we will be back again. And of course, the John Muir Trust, as I call them, headquarters, the main John Muir Trust headquarters, through Ross, have a whole series of talks and opportunities to log into during the course of the year. So keep in touch with that. So thanks very much, everyone. I'll ask Ross to log us out because he's in control of Zoom, and hopefully we'll see you in the spring.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.